those perspectives. Maybe if I could just ask Dr. Brooks, I told her I'd want her to chime in about gaining diverse perspectives. And I'm emphasizing it too much, but I've been in the business, the sports business, long enough to know how difficult it is to achieve what she's achieved. But for the persistence that she's had, give us some insight into the global perspectives that you need to deal with some of these diverse issues and diverse people, and especially since you said 0.01% of the people in our industry are female doing what you're doing.
The first way to begin to address that is to share a story. I practice in Dallas, as I said, as a clinical psychologist. So when I first came on board, I was in the locker room in the heyday of the Cowboys' success on and ultimately their antics off the field. So what happened was I was brought to Jerry Jones, and he wanted to know why a woman. And frankly, I knew that I knew my stuff, but he didn't know my stuff. So my answer to him was, if you can name one player in your locker room that didn't have anyone in their lives that looked like me, then don't hire me. Well, of course, they either had a mother, sister, daughter, wife, what have you. So of course, that answered that question. The next question was, how would I function in that locker room? Well, I didn't know the answer to that, but my answer to him at the time was, why don't you put me there and find out? In other words, I wasn't going to give him the answers to the questions that he wanted to hear. I gave him the answers to the questions that I felt he needed to hear. And that was the first step in changing the paradigm. The second question that I didn't have the answer to was how I would function in that locker room. So I went in every day initially dressed like I dressed going to my office, questioning why in the heck am I here? What am I doing in this locker room, which wasn't the most appealing, pleasant smelling place in the world. But one day a player came in, and I'll name his name. His name was Nate Newton. And I said, well, welcome, Mr. Newton. I called all the players by their surnames because I recognized it was their world and I was a visitor in it. So whatever culture existed there was one that I needed to learn and adhere and respect to their cultural mores and tendencies to a point. And he was basically sent as the scout, I later found out, to learn more about me and what I was about. Well, number one, he said, why are you here? You need to be in the front office, not in the locker room. I said, what do you mean? Well, in that time, it was 1997, the owner of the team had been arrested as well as the coach, Larry Switzer, had been arrested. He said, the problems are in the front, not back here. Well, he had a point there, but I said, I'm here to provide support. At the time, our role was in player development, family assistance. Basically, it was helping players transition into the professional sport and deal with the life issues that came along with the pressures in a high-profile job. Well, what I finally learned was that in order for me to be trusted by the players, they had to initiate me. He said, number one, if you're going to be here and a part of our team, you have to be a part of our team. And I said, what does that mean? He said, well, you can't come in here dressed like that. Dressed like what? Dressed like you're dressed. Well, I had a business attire. He said, you need to dress like us. Well, he had on a warm-up suit. I don't dress like that. And he said, well, that was number one. Number two, if you're going to be here, then be here. You don't have office hours 9 to 2 or whatever. You're going to be here, you be here. That means hanging out here. I said, I don't hang out. And he said, well, if you're going to be part of the team, this is what you do. He said, third, you're at practice. Practice is outside. Practice is outside. So you're outside. It's hot in Texas, if in case of you don't know that. So that was the third thing. So to his point, the next day I came in, I wasn't in a warm-up suit, but I was more casually dressed. I was around, I greeted everybody, said hello to the guys, said hello to the coaches, and when practice went outside, so did I. And I did that every day, as opposed to every other day for a couple of hours. Soon guys who were watching me they were beginning to talk to me. And they would come up, if nothing other, to say hello. Then they wanted to learn about me. Well, my life and who I am is none of their business, so I thought. But actually, they were curious about who I was, what my life was like. And as a clinical psychologist, historically, I was trained, you don't disclose anything about yourselves. But they wanted to know about my children, my husband, my family. And that began that connection, as you've heard all of us talk about in relationships. They wanted to know who I was, how I lived, what I thought. And so I began to introduce them to me. And that was the first step in crossing over into that cultural competency and understanding the traditions and what happens in the locker room. They'd never had a woman in the locker room. Women weren't allowed back there. But I let them know that was their space and their place, and began to act like this was their world and I was visiting. And that's how I was invited to join the team and crossing the gauntlets with that team. And that's what propelled me forward with other teams moving forward that I work with, including all of the teams I covered in the MBA, was understanding what culture that they had with each team. And one final comment, when I transitioned to the MBA in New York, I covered all 30 teams. And when I was hired to do for the entire league what I had done with the Cowboys. And David Stern had his idea of what he wanted me to do with each of the teams, which was basically one formula, one model for all the teams. But to Mr. Ed here, what his point was this: you have to be sensitive to the cultural mores of that particular geographical environment, the people that are there. So what works for the Memphis Grizzlies is not going to work for the Los Angeles Lakers. And that's why you have to be sensitive to the individuality and the nuances of a particular culture, cultural environment, and geographical region. And therefore, I was successful in installing and reinforcing the programming on each of those teams because I respected what each team was trying to accomplish individually. And it was that individual difference, I believe, that made me successful in achieving the goals.